Hello, everybody. Today is February 11, and it's the regular weekly meeting for the Gateway API community. As always, this is under the CNCF, so there is basically just one rule, which is being nice to each other. So, yeah, please be nice to each other. And in the meantime, if you want to write down your name in the attendees list, you're welcome to do it. And I don't know if there is someone who is new to this kind of meeting. If so, please, if you feel so, you are welcome to introduce yourself. Otherwise, we can just move on. I don't know if there is someone new. Okay, I guess we can move on. The list here is pretty short today. And the first one is, as always, check on the checkpoint on the release status. Do you want to take this, Rob?
Sure. And I would say, despite the list being short, I feel like almost all of the items look like they could take a significant amount of time. So
Yeah.
we will probably have to still time box some of these. With that said, yeah, let me run through these. We have three gaps moving on. I guess actually that can be updated to 4 in experimental channel. Cores made it through. That was great. Thank you, Leong. Then listener sets as well. And Dave has gone directly to into implementation mode, which I really appreciate. There are several PRs. One of which at least is working on a split that would enable this new API to be part of a new API group. And so, yeah, worth looking through. Yeah, so anyway, but yeah, that particular one,
This one?
generate
Okay.
clients, and the one that allows you to have 2 separate clients, which seems like a likely requirement of having separate API groups. I know there's been some work. Well, let me not get ahead of myself, but I know some people are looking into ways we can tweak API machinery to simplify this. But yeah, we'll leave that alone
I
for
think
now.
we can have also experimental APIs in the same clients that have standard APIs too.
Yeah.
So that's an option.
Yeah, that would make sense. Cool. And then, yeah, if we keep on going through the list, retry budgets just squeaked in last week. And API design has already translated it into another PR, which is great because we have a pretty short window. If you jump down to the timeline section, we're targeting the end of this phase to be February 26th. So despite the last phase being very long, we are aiming for this to be quite short so that we can actually get a release out in a relatively meaningful time frame. So in practice, that means that we've got 2 weeks and a little bit to get all these API PRs merged and all requirements met. So yeah, and then if we keep on running through the list, percentage-based request mirroring. Thank you for your persistence, Lior. We got everything that we need. So I think this just needs maybe docs update. I forget, there's, a couple spec changes, but this can graduate to GA. Everything, all the requirements have been met. Back in TLS policy, I haven't been paying as close attention to. Candace, do you have, or I don't know if Candace is on the call.
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm still working on it. There was, I've done some refactoring over the last week. There's still a major block for me. Got a little bit of help from Mattia. Thank you, Mattia. And I'm just continuing to plug. I hope I can get this done in time for people to run the tests.
Cool. Appreciate all your work. And then policy attachment is on the agenda today. So I am sure we'll hear more about this. Thank you, Guy, for picking it up and running with it.
Sorry, Rob. There was Leo who
yeah.
seems to. Do you want to say something, Leo?
Yeah. I mean, just on the same note of all the, I guess, unblockers for the release. But yeah, I mean, I could edit to the end, unless you want to hit it in the same bullet.
Sure, we can go for it.
Yeah, just I wanted to know, like, there's this conformance issue we found, like, with the mesh conformance reports being incorrectly reported, and ideally I would want at least, not a fix, but at least like some exclusion for a misreporting from now on to be included in 1.3, and then, you know, we're gonna fix the way the conformance are actually being tested for mesh, but at least not reporting the wrong things.
We do already have an issue for that, right?
Yeah, and it's yeah, I think I've added as well the release blocker tag. It's just like not being tracked here, so maybe it's worth tracking it here. And also, if anyone want to join in, participate in fixing
is it related to the suite machinery? Or I mean, what's the problem there?
I mean, yeah, without focusing on like what should be the solution, I think the problem is that we report for all the meshes that they pass a lot of conformance, like a lot of features where actually we never test any of these features with mesh implementations. So there's only like 4 features for mesh implementations that we test. All of them starts with mesh. But then when you go into reporting, like the supported features for, you know, a lot of the features that should be supported for mesh, they are reported as being supported, but they're never tested with the service as a parent rep. So I think just for 1.3, I think ideally just the list of reporting for mesh should be basically what we actually test for mesh. And then we should ideally, in the issue, I also put it, ideally we should have some, as you say, suite machinery or like framework change that make it easy to test features both for mesh and gateway, because most of the features should be relevant both for mesh and gateway, but have implementations the option to like opt in whether to test it for mesh and gateway or just for gateway, because some implementations do not support mesh.
Okay, thank you. Candace?
If Leo is done, I don't know if we wanted to take a note on what he mentioned or not. But I just remembered something that we talked about last time regarding, and John Howard's here, so maybe we could talk about it a little bit more this time. He brought up an issue regarding backend TLS policy service attachment being problematic. And we did mention it last time as a possible blocker for 1.3. So I sort of wanted to talk a little bit more about it. John Howard, do you feel like this is something that would be a blocker for 1.3?
Are we promoting backend TLS policy in 1.3?
Yes.
Okay, then to me it's fairly important. I mean, I hate to block something, so I wouldn't say I should alone decide that. But to me, like especially for mesh, it's more important. I can see why it's a fairly niche edge case for non-mesh cases, but like for us, this is kind of the reason why we haven't actually adopted this in Istio.
I think it's reasonable to choose for an implementation to not adopt it until this is resolved, but I don't think it necessarily needs to block it advancing, because I think that a potential fix for this would be to add some sort of discriminator that narrows the scope of for which connections should this be applied. And if we have the default of if that field is not specified, then it is implicitly global. I believe that would be a like backwards compatible change.
Yeah, I think it's probably ideal scenario is we just decide in broad strokes what the path forward is going to be so that we know if it's backwards compatible or not. Honestly, it seems like my gut feeling is probably the changes would be. But if we could like iron that out, then like Mike said, we can always add it forward. We just don't want to like push it to GA and then 5 minutes later decide, oh, actually, the only way to fix this is fundamental changes, and now it's too late,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, no, I agree with that that idea, and that just to clarify, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but it seems like the primary way we want to differentiate here is whether this is for mesh or for ingress traffic. Is that fair? Or
Not
are we
really.
No.
It's
Okay.
no, I would say no. I mean, mesh is the worst case just because it's implicit. Like I don't have to have any explicit routes in order for this to
Yeah.
apply, which just makes the scope a lot more ambiguous and broad. But there's definitely use cases for ingress only.
So
Like you're not always getting traffic of the same type going to the same thing. Now, to be fair, like it's probably not super common for someone to expose the same service on two different gateway paths, but it does happen.
Yeah,
Especially
for
if you
sure.
have like a internal VNet gateway and an external gateway or something like that. Like even with a single implementation, you could be in a situation like this.
Would it be fair? One of my earlier proposals that was not tied to backend TLS policy, but it was in this general idea, was to add a gateway class name to target ref to like for policy, basically to allow you to segment by that, assuming that mesh had some meaningful interpretation of that. Is like it is a single differentiator like that effective?
I mean, it would solve some problems for sure, not all of them. So it just really becomes a matter of how much do we care to solve, right? In general,
okay.
I think like this is a general problem that's going to impact any backend type things, and we're adding more and more backend things as we go. So it does seem like having a broad solution to solve this problem, even if it seems like a little bit of niche edge cases specific for TLS, if we have the same pattern and then can apply that to all the backend type things, that's probably something that's going to pay off. Hopefully Candace wasn't laughing because I scope creeped the hell out of this. Like I said, like I hope we don't have to, I don't want to block this or anything, but like for like load balancing policies, for example, again, like you might have, I don't know, different policy from internal and external or something. Not sure.
Can anyone take an action or follow up to actually write down the problems we'd like to solve here? Not necessarily a solution, but I feel like I understand.
Is Rob asking for user stories?
Perfect. Yeah, I feel like I understand at some level this, but I don't think I'm getting the full scope of the problems that are present here. So if anyone is able to write those down and maybe others can add to it, that would be really helpful.
Yes,
In all
please.
seriousness, I feel like we've danced around that a couple of times with backend TLS policy, and that I'm not sure. I feel like I've seen one or two things, but not really a great comprehensive. These are the things we want to be able to do. So I would love to see that.
I mean, the
Also
one
for the
sentence
record.
summary to me is just like on any given traffic path, you should be able to define what policy applies and not accidentally, apply to too much traffic, right? But that's very vague.
I feel like we get into corner cases like, should you be able, does it even make sense to talk about allowing for a default for backend TLS policy that attaches to a service and then being able to override it with a route on a gateway. And I don't know, it just comes to mind as a thing where we should probably think, is that a user story we're trying to accomplish or not, you know? And I'm not sure we've seen any really great discussion trying to nail down which of the corner cases we care about and which are the ones we don't.
So I could open a discussion in Slack, and Mike and Mike M.
Yep.
Mike Morris. Mike Morris and John Howard, if you could follow up with use cases.
I think rather than a Slack thread, what might be good is if we can start like a doc or something like that to start like actually collecting user stories with the intent of we talked about this a little bit last time about like potentially like a memorandum gap on like a general purpose pattern for this for policy attachment.
Doc
So
is fine.
I have some ideas about like an actual potential implementation, but would definitely appreciate more input on the user story side.
Doc is fine, but if we have a gap already where we could just put some small PRs to add them there, soft ask.
That might be good too. Yeah. I could probably start that actually.
Very much appreciated.
Cool.
And what would it be called? Backend TLS policies, service
No,
attachment?
it would be a memorandum gap on like
Meshed use cases, or
no, it's gonna be even more general than that. It's something like scoping patterns for policy attachment or something like that. Because it's very much not specific to backend TLS policy. This is just
That does sound very general.
most significant ways in which we have hit this problem and need to deal with it.
Mike
It's a similar
Morris, do
problem
you want
for Z policy and the like budgeted retry stuff that I was working on with Eric. But we have this in multiple places.
Well, what I'm interested is like in the beginning we mentioned that it shouldn't be a blocker, right? And you both think that there is a path forward, but nobody mentioned what do you think the path forward. So
yes, I think that you reviewed the like budgeted retries gap. One
Yeah.
of the possible ideas here is like the from clause that I had originally proposed and then we cut out. Something like that could be an additive way. Sorry about the dog barking if you hear. To do something like this. And I think I have another comment on like Rob had an early issue about gateway class. Sorry about the dog. Gateway class scoping for policy attachment. So there's a couple of ideas floating around. So I think we have some implementation options.
To target a gateway class?
That was an earlier proposal. I don't know that is sufficient to cover the broadest use cases, but that was one approach to this problem.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I don't want to be the one as well, like putting. I mean, I know a lot of us want to promote it, but I think we do need to get at least some directional consensus here before, because, for example, like solutions that came like that now proposed, I think targeting a gateway class is not that great, especially from a namespace scoped policy, where gateway class has a cluster scope.
To clarify on that specific.
Sorry, I'll throw a monkey wrench in there and point out that, oh, hey, listener sets are coming.
Yeah. To clarify on what I was referring to is gateway class as a filter, not as the primary target, as a way to filter the targets.
Yeah.
On the from.
Yeah, it's similar to how section name is used.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, my point is like I'm not planning to delve into the resolutions now, whether they make sense for all of us or not. But like my point is, yeah, I mean, I think we do need this kind of resolution path before we are all happy with this gap going GA. In my opinion. So.
I agree. I also would say that we have some large topics left on the agenda, so we should probably keep on moving.
Can we revisit next time? To determine if it's a blocker for 1.3.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully between now and the next meeting, we can have something written up. And then that will help clarify if we have a path forward or not.
Thanks, Rob.
Okay. So I guess next point is yours, Flynn.
Did we already talk about not reporting untested stuff for conformance tests?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm sorry I missed that. I'll read the issue. All right. Mattia, can I share a screen for a few minutes?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Not, don't expect terrible drama. It just seemed easier to do slides for this. Of course, Zoom still won't let me present. There we go. Okay, everybody cross your fingers.
The only reason I came to this meeting today, Flynn, was for the drama.
Sorry, dude.
Wow, slides and everything. This is impressive.
Oh.
Don't be
Cool.
too impressed by the slides. But
Oh.
meshy
Oh,
There's
things.
some animation.
animations.
Oh man.
Hey, this is why we have Macintoshes and Keynote and things like that, right? I mean, come on. There are three questions that have come up a few times as we've talked, mostly in smaller groups about Gamma and Mesh and things like that. And I thought it would be worth bringing that into this meeting to basically say, hey, it would be nice to make sure that the whole group is sort of a little bit better synced about some of this stuff. And these are the three questions that have come up a few times there. Is anybody actually using this stuff? And whatever answer we give to that, how do we know that that's the right answer? And then what conclusions can we draw from that? Where do we go from there? So, is anybody using Gamma? The answer to that is an unequivocal yes. People are using it. By people here, I mean real human beings embodying the roles of Anna and Chihiro. And I'm deliberately leaving Ian out of that because as I look around at Gateway API as a whole and I look at what we're doing, we kind of ignore Ian a lot of the time. And in particular, I don't really think Ian is likely to be deploying service meshes for people. I think that's more of a Chihiro thing. I think Ian is more about, here's a cluster, knock yourself out. If people think I'm wrong about that, we can talk about that. How do we know this? Well, on the one hand, we talk to people who say they use it. Like Morris and I have done a couple of workshops at KubeCon and things like that. And we get people coming up going, oh, this is great. And they use it. And of course, that's not actually worth very much. So how do we really know that people are using it? And there are two very real reasons that we really know people are using this. Number one, if you're using Linkerd, you don't have a choice. And this is a thing that I have become unsure about whether this has been well communicated to Gateway API as a whole. There are no ways in Linkerd to do per route east-west configuration other than using Gateway API route resources. Repeat after me, Linkerd users don't have a choice. They have to use this stuff. And we know that they are using it because we get the issues filed when we get it wrong. And that, I would love to tell you that there's only been like one issue filed against Linkerd for misbehaving route resources, but that would be a lie. It happens every so often.
And as John added in chat, this is also the case for Istio ambient. Gateway API is the primary way to configure Istio ambient mode.
Right. Now, in John's, not to beat on John or anything, I personally do not know how many people are using Istio ambient. Because I'm not an Istio guy, right? But I do know that people are using Linkerd, and so I see the issues come over the transom, and I see people bug me when things don't work and stuff like that. And I assume that John is in a very similar situation with Istio
Yes.
Ambient.
Yes,
Yeah.
people are using it enough that we similarly are getting issues when things aren't quite right. So like we know people
Right.
are.
That's not in my slides because although I have heard Mike and John say that offline randomly, I didn't feel like putting them on the spot. So thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. Okay, so yeah, we know people are using this stuff, and we have good reasons for believing that. So where does that lead us? This is more crystal ball-y sort of stuff, but one thing that I think is relevant to note is that I just did an empty reply because my focus was in the wrong place. Obviously, we have to expect that service as a parent is going to live forever. Because, hey, congratulations, this is a GA API and people are using it, and that means we have to support it. I expect we're going to need to see new kinds of things as parent refs and as backend refs. And my reasons for that are that we have people asking us for new kinds of routing semantics that cannot be expressed using our existing backend refs. The work, oh crap, I've forgotten the person's name and I'm terribly sorry. The work coming out of Google for having a backend ref that directly targets endpoints, for example, is a good example of new kinds of things that are not expressible right now. One that we kind of run across sometimes is there are situations where you really want to be able to do failover in a way that backend refs using services will not allow because that breaks progressive delivery. I personally think we're going to have to solve that with a new kind of a backend ref. We'll see. It'll be fun to find out if I'm wrong. New parent types, because parent types, what we're seeing is that the parent ref is implicitly describing a class of traffic. So if your parent ref is a gateway, you are talking about ingress traffic. If your parent ref is a service, you're talking about east-west routing. If you want to talk about something like egress, you can't do that with either of those parents, and you have to have a new type of thing. I think we're going to see more of that. Again, obviously that's crystal ball types of stuff, but you know. And that kind of brings us to Gateway API as a whole, because like that parent ref thing I was talking about and the backend ref thing, that's not really Gamma specific entirely. That's going to affect Gateway API as a whole. One thing that has become clear from looking at the way Gamma is being adopted is that Anna's not really ever going to talk to us, the Gateway API group. Anna may very well not know we exist in a lot of ways. Anna is likely to see problems from her perspective and then go and talk to her implementation about them. That is what we are seeing with Linkerd and Istio and et cetera, in much the same way that if Anna has a problem where a service or a deployment doesn't behave the way she expects it to, she does not go to the Kubernetes maintainers. She goes to her cluster provider or her mesh provider or her ingress provider or something, because those are the people that she's used to thinking about. They're closer to her, and she is not likely to be thinking, hey, I think this is a problem with the Kubernetes core API. She's just seeing a problem in behavior that doesn't match her expectations. So we should expect Anna to filter everything through the implementations. I didn't put it on the slide, but I expect that's probably likely for Chihiro as well. I don't think Chihiro will tend to go, hey, that's weird. This route seems to be doing something funny, and then immediately come to the Gateway API group. I think they're much more likely to file an issue against Linkerd. Hopefully they'll file the issue against Istio if they're using Istio, but they might file it against Linkerd just out of spite. You never know. That implies that the implementations need to be prepared to raise important issues up to the Gateway API group because they are the ones that are going to be interacting more with us. Thankfully, we actually see that happen, right? Gateway API 1.1.1 was a response to an implementation finding a bug and then raising it to the group as a whole. There have been other cases of that, so that's a good thing. The one that's kind of unpleasant about this is that the implementations do not have the luxury of standing still and waiting for us as they're talking about this sort of thing. And that leads us to a bit of an aside about the fascinating position that Linkerd is in. Because when users come over to Linkerd and say, hey, we want this thing, and that thing has not been standardized by Gateway API, we don't have a native configuration resource to fall back on. And we also tend to not be in a position where we can tell people, oh, it's cool, just wait a couple of years and then we'll have it through Gateway API. So instead, what we end up doing is we design an internal configuration service because we do have good internal configuration protocols. And then we figure out a way that we can expose that to the users where we can both support that thing and have it be simple and not step on Gateway API's toes when Gateway API standardizes it so that we have a transition path. Normally, we do this with, you guessed it, annotations. Nick isn't on this. Okay, thank you, Shane. Nick isn't on this call, so I wasn't sure I was going to get a scream of agony about that. But yeah, this is a direct response to the fact that our options are sharply limited because we don't have native resources to fall back on. But at the same time, we have to move forward, and we also need to do it in a way where hopefully people can continue using the old way until they move over to using whatever new thing comes along. And that leads us to the experimental channel debate. There's only one other thing that I have in this thing before I stop sharing, but it segues into the whole experimental channel thing, which is that Anna does not care about the experimental channel. Remember that Anna is somebody who is very busy, very focused on her business needs, thinks that all of this stuff is total friction. She is not going to go out there and use the experimental channel. Her cousin Felix might. Maybe he's friendlier to the Gateway API group than Anna is, but Anna, I don't see Anna ever using this stuff. I don't really see Chihiro using the experimental channel either. I see that as another case where we, the Gateway API group, need to be finding and cultivating friendly platform engineers who are willing to help us out, because the experimental channel is all about helping us out and not about anything that Anna needs. And with that, I shall stop sharing.
You undersold it as a good presentation.
Oh, well, okay. Sorry for underselling it then.
I was going to ask for a link to those slides, but those look too fancy to have a link possible. But
I can actually, I can give you a link through iCloud.com, but I can also turn it into a PDF and then give you a PDF.
Sure.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
The PDFs don't get the animations, but that's okay.
Oh no.
Um,
That's great slides.
Yeah.
Flynn, one clarifying question. When you say experimental channel, you mean the channel, or you actually also mean the API, separate API groups, or?
I mean that I don't see a situation in which Anna is ever going to be willing to use things labeled experimental in production.
I think we're going to get some TCP route and UDP route fans in a second here. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Well, that is a fascinating and interesting corner case that we should absolutely discuss. Yes.
So-
Mike, I think, was first.
Sure, yeah. So from our experience, like at Microsoft, like working for a cloud vendor, we actually have a plethora of real customers in Anna's persona that are very much asking for experimental functionality.
Are they asking for experimental functionality? Or are they asking for a safe way to use something that they want that hasn't yet made it into standard? Because Anna is definitely going to be asking. Sorry, go ahead.
Want the latter. I would say that it is actually less customers wanting a safe thing and more customers asking for the thing that they see available and are probably more amenable to risk than our service teams that are offering products to these customers. So the check on safety is should you run these things in production? Probably not. And the check though is typically not coming, like sometimes it does from more mature customers that are doing things at scale. In my experience, it seems that it is more often our service teams are unwilling to make experimental APIs available because we don't feel we can adequately support them when they come back to bite them later for using things inappropriately.
Lior, were you going to add to that?
Yeah,
Or
I feel like I have similar thoughts as well. Like it'd be surprised that some customers as well prefer something that is vendor neutral and experimental on top of, let's say, GCP specific stuff, or vendor specific stuff, which is surprising, but happening. And as well, I wanted to add something. Not sure if there's any Argo early users here, but I mean, I think I'm not sure also what's the audience, like what are the users of Linkerd, but I'm sure there are a lot of companies, like medium-sized companies, that were off trying alpha APIs. Argo was one example of them. Istio was a different example. I'm not very expert there, but yeah, I mean, alpha is kind of considered experimental as well, right?
I'm not sure I remember Argo deliberately trying experimental stuff. Dave, what were you going to say?
The question I had is, have you considered patching the Gateway API CRDs to add the specific properties you want, so you can prefix your property names with like a linker and like a namespace type of thing, like a linker /property name?
Considered, yes. It turns out that doesn't actually gain us anything over annotations. And
validation.
We have validation because we are using a validating webhook everywhere, so we can validate annotations until the cows come home. And the common response to that is, oh, but wait a minute, nobody wants to use validating webhooks anymore. You all need to be using, the validating admission controller. But if you actually want to support Kubernetes that's relatively old like we do, then you do want validating webhooks, and you don't want the validating admission controller because we can't support it for older versions of Kube.
Yeah.
And actually, I have yet to. I am kind of trying to verify whether or not the validating admission controller can verify annotations or not, can validate annotations or not. I'm not sure. Nobody really seems to know. But webhooks can and do, and we take advantage of that. So patching the CRDs is just an operational hassle that doesn't gain us anything.
Flynn, what's the feedback you're getting
this does imply that the things that we do in annotations need to be very simple data types, but that works in our favor.
Flynn,
Lior,
what's the feedback you're getting? I mean, I'm actually interested in it. What's the feedback you're getting from customers who need to migrate from an annotation-based feature to a gateway feature?
So far, it hasn't happened because so far none of the things we've added with annotations are actually supported across the board by Gateway API.
I see. I think most of the problem, at least in my opinion, comes down to like also whether it's going to be experimental or annotation, whatever. Once the problem comes down to how do we make the upgrade process easy and safe?
Yeah.
And I didn't hear good ideas up until now.
There is also one very important thing that I should stress is that when we add things as annotations, they are supported. They are not experimental annotations at that point. They are things that we put out there and we go, yeah, you're going to be able to use this. This is okay. It's safe. You can rely on it. And that, the thing that I find really interesting about Mike saying that Azure gets Anna asking for experimental features is that it's so very different from what we tend to see in the Linkerd world, where we get people going, no, we want things we can rely on, and we want not to have to deal with re-architecting the world because y'all decided to change something in the experimental channel. So yeah, I find that really fascinating, Mike.
I think we have to time box this one.
I think we do.
Yeah, 15-minute warning.
Yeah.
I'm going to
actually,
move...
Yeah, the next one is yours again. So
I was going to say some of this stuff should really be, we kind of leapfrogged into the experimental channel discussion, which I think is okay. There we go. There's been a lot of text bouncing back and forth about experimental API group and such. I was kind of hoping that everybody would be around so we could talk about that synchronously a little bit. I think John had to leave, and I know that he is one of the folks who seemed to have opinions about this. So I'm not sure that I have anything completely well structured all on my own, as opposed to just putting this on because I'd seen a ton of text flying by. I will say though that yeah, actually there is one other thing that I'll point out here, which is that I'd like to emphasize that from the perspective, I'd like to emphasize that it's important to separate our perspectives here, okay? The experimental channel is of benefit to the Gateway API project, but it does not really benefit Anna and Chihiro. From their perspective, it's an opportunity for them to use something that they're going to get screwed by later, eventually, if it ever changes. So it's primarily of benefit to us, the project, not to the users. And I think that's very, very important to call out explicitly. We as a group are going to need to be finding friendly people to work with for experimental, but no, we really should not assume that the majority of the Annas and Chihiros in the world want to use this or are well served by it. We should be trying to get the standard channel in place for Anna and Chihiro, and then courting friendly users who want to help us experiment for the experimental channel, whatever that looks like. Mike, I'm fairly confident that some of your customers are asking for experimental because they do not understand the impact that they're buying themselves
share
into.
that suspicion, yes.
Yeah. It's a really hard suspicion to validate, but
it's the kind of thing that, yeah, like we have service teams that are acting as a check because they have been situations before where they will anticipate that if they make a thing available, there may not be enough awareness or caution around using it, and then it comes back to bite them when it changes, and then it's on them of why did this not work?
yeah. I've seen similar things at other points in my career as well. Yeah. Lior?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted like to put my 2 cents here. I mean, I'm sure you guys have much more experience, but as someone who a little bit more than 3.5 years ago was a customer, and I just feel like sometimes, and also from the other side in Google, sometimes we feel like we know what the customers appreciate and want, but like I can tell you for sure that there is a lot of customers that, and I'm not talking about like small startups or whatever, like I'm talking on like medium plus companies that would want to have a feature supported and would be willing to upgrade and following the release notes when they do cluster upgrades, when they do mesh upgrades. And we have been one of these customers. And also I also am sure that when the update comes, those customers would complain to their providers, whatever, cloud providers or mesh providers, whatever, to say, hey, why do you break change so many? But still they would, when they're making this choice, and I was in this boat, they know, hey, I wanted this feature now, this functionality is good for me, I want to do it, and I know that in X amount of months, like a year, I'm gonna need to eat like or suffer from a hard migration. And we've been doing consciously this decision a lot. So I'm just offering the other head of as a customer.
I do agree that there is definitely a subset of customers that are aware of the risks and it's an acceptable trade-off. And yeah, like from Azure's perspective, I would love to be able to reach those customers as well.
to me, those customers fall in the category of, well, yeah, cultivate some friendlies who are willing to play with this stuff. I don't think those are necessarily incompatible. I think that the customers y'all are describing, in my experience, would be a minority, probably a vocal minority. And I should also point out that I think that having some way to put experimental things in front of people to let them use, I think that's really important. What I don't think is that it makes sense to assume that the majority of the customers wants to be using that and understand the trade-offs if they do.
Yeah, I mean, there's other people like we should time box, but I do have like I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I do have like more opinions here about, you know, yeah, the way to, as you said, to put this for people to use, and if we can do it in a standardized way, an experimental group, and how, in my opinion, it's better than an annotation or like vendor specific annotations. But yeah, I think we should go back to the target, like to the goals of the experimental API and what are the exact goals, debate there and see what from there.
The other thing that I'd like to point out as I think being worthy of emphasis before we cut this off for the time box is that another of the very real things that we're dealing with here is we seem to be getting feedback from the cloud providers that when they want to start doing managed offerings of Gateway API, that they don't see paths for doing managed experimental channel. And if that is the case, and we believe that, then it becomes exceptionally difficult for me to find a way of putting experimental in front of users that is not using a separate API group from the standard channel, because it's really hard for me to see a way where a cloud provider can both only offer a managed standard channel and a friendly user can still use experimental. And it would be really nice to have somebody demonstrate a way in which I am wrong about that, but so far I haven't seen it. And that makes me very sad, for the record. No more hands? Okay, so I think we should move on to GEP 713, which is
Real
my
quick.
personal favorite thing in the world. Okay, damn it.
Real
Go
quick,
ahead, Shane.
real quick, relax. So, just everybody who's sitting there not like necessarily feeling tuned into this conversation, this has potentially a very big impact on you, a huge one if you're an implementer. So please do click that discussion and go read through it. I'm sorry it's going to take a lot of reading, but it's valuable to you.
You're talking
Apparently
about the
we
GEP
don't
713
have it.
discussion, or because there's no link
No, the
to
API group separation, but
The
apparently we
API
don't
group
have it linked right
separation one.
now. Let
Yeah, let me
me
link
add a
it.
link.
But
Oh, okay,
definitely
go for
if you're like confused or like if you're an implementation, you probably want to take a look at this and kind of
if you're a
suss it out.
user, you really want to take a look at this too and think kind of hard about some of these options, because
Yeah.
all of the options, actually, I guess this is one other important thing to emphasize for people who are not fully tuned in on all this discussion, is that there are a number of possible ideas being kicked around, and they're all terrible, awful, no good, very bad, horrible ideas. The question is, which of them are the least terrible, horrible, awful, no good, very bad for users and for implementers? And chances are really good that the ones that are the least bad for the users may not be the ones that are the least bad for the implementers.
Yeah,
Well said.
I think it's the real opposite. Everything is good for the users in this concept in this area is very bad for implementations, and the opposite.
I don't think we have any that are very good for either group is the problem. But yeah, there is a very real and very large tension between good for the users and good for the implementers. And no one will be shocked to hear me say that I am going to place all of my weight on the users, and the implementers can just implement.
I honestly tend to agree with you. I think users are more important than implementations. I mean, the burden of the API should be on our shoulders, I think.
Yeah, I feel pretty strongly about that, because there are untold thousands of users and small numbers of dozens of implementations. So, this is part of the job of being in software, is you make your own life miserable in service of making your users' lives better. This is a core part of what we do. And so I tend to feel pretty strongly about that.
I don't know if it helps, but I think there are things that are only easy and good for the implementation, but ultimately everything that's good for the user ends up being good for the implementation as well.
And certainly in the long term, yeah. I think there's a very real chance that doing the stuff that's good for the users is a short-term piece of pain for the implementers. And I think that would be the right decision. So this is the point where I get to be grateful that most of the implementers on this call are not within 1,000 miles of me, so they can't come in and, 1,600 kilometers, so they can't come over and beat me about the head and shoulders with blunt objects. But we should probably move on and let Guy talk about GEP 713, which, as I previously said, is my favorite topic in all the world, and I totally have not ever considered making an AI image of a can of worms labeled GEP 713.
So we're going to be very sad now, Flynn, because this one's going to be very quick. I sent the pull request earlier today, and we don't have to discuss it. And now, I mean, this is a very big one. People need some time now to go through the whole thing, and we can discuss the details some other time. The only one thing that I will mention is the fact that it's kind of a bold move that I'm proposing of bringing 713 back from memorandum straight to standard, right? I think something that it may have not been done before. I got Nick's feedback on this one, and he's not here on the call. Obviously, I cannot speak on his behalf, but he told me that he believes that that's okay for this particular case of 713, right? Because it's a gap that does not involve engineering the API, etc. But I want to hear from you as well, right? Because that's what we are proposing there. So bringing 713 back from the dead inside of memorandum to standard again, and putting the other ones, and that is the part that we're not certain. Maybe those other ones, 26, 48, and 49, could be memorandum, or it could be, I think there's another another option that Nick mentioned. Let's see if I can find it, because I don't remember if I have it right now. Yeah, declined maybe.
2648 and others are being merged into 713. So they're going to just go away, right?
Correct, yes.
Do we, crap, I have to jump onto another meeting in 2 minutes. Do we know what the difference between memorandum and standard is? I'm not sure I do.
Memorandum is like standard whoops.
I'm sorry, what was that, Shane?
Memorandum is like standard whoops.
I would say that standard typically has some code associated with it, whereas memorandum is typically defining or clarifying behavioral expectations, and it's things that typically will be or should be reflected in like the API docs themselves rather than like changes to structs or YAML.
That's kind of how I felt, so I'm not. There are ways that I feel that maybe 713 should stay as a memorandum, but I don't have a really strong opinion about that.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on this either. I view memorandum and standard as equally stable. One is more of describing a concept, and the other, standard, is traditionally been used to represent features in our API that are directly user facing, like fields or resources. This is a murky middle ground, but
yeah.
If that's the case, we may not have used it properly in the case of 713, right? Because what we did is we used memorandum as a way to file that and communicate that had been superseded by two other gaps that were basically a fork of 713, right? So we
Yeah.
could promote those other ones respectively to provisional, experimental, and then ultimately to standard. So I think we need a way to differentiate things that are filed, right, for good, and things that are still in the process of adding to standard at some point.
I'm
I
sorry
need
to stop you, but we are over time. Dave, Lior, would you mind putting off your items to the next meeting?
Sounds like a PSA. So just take a look. There's like a interesting performance stuff that we probably should add.
I'm curious, did you actually run into an implementation that where this was affected, or is this just
Yeah, I did.
trying to prevent? Okay. Oh, I see. Good to know. All right.
Okay,
Thanks.
cool. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day. And see
Thank
you
you,
next time.
Flynn, for an awesome presentation. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.
See y'all. See y'all soon.